All right, everyone. Rivalry weekend. A lot to get into here on Up to the Second College Football, presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors, Season 3, the final episode of the year, Episode 13. And Academy Sports and Outdoors is your college football tailgate destination and official sports good and outdoor retailer of the SEC. Please stop by your local Academy store or visit academy.com and gear up for game day today. All right, so Billy and Caroline are going to get you ready for A&M and LSU and beyond, of course. And I'll talk to Jake Crain about all the big storylines in college football this weekend. It's Up to the Second College Football, presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors.
Need a new grill? Academy Sports and Outdoors is the destination for your outdoor cooking needs. With our free in-store assembly and pre-assembled grills and smokers, buy online at academy.com and pick up in-store. So keep those grilling plans at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
Our next guest is the J-Boy. We know him, Jake Crain here, host of on the Daily Wire there, Crain and Company. What's going on, my man? How you been?
Oh, man, been great. You know, it's this time of year, it's kind of bittersweet. We get all these great matchups. You know, the playoff picture's kind of taken fold. The coaching carousel begins, but it also means we're the last week of the regular season of college football, man. I mean, it flies by. It always does. But I'm excited to eat some turkey this week. I can tell you that much.
Hey, so is it still okay to call you the J-Boy? Because I know that was like...
Of course.
All right, just making sure.
Yeah. Of course. I'll always be J-Boy, you know, at heart. But I even got it on my X or Twitter or whatever they're calling it this week on my handle. So, of course, man.
Well, let's get into it. How intrigued are you by this A&M coaching search and what the future could look like for a program that hasn't gotten it right?
Well, you know, I'm very intrigued. I mean, you look at A&M, you look at the brand, right? You look at the resources. I've continued to say, regardless of what, you know, others on the outside think, that A&M has had everything to win at a high level except the right leader. And eventually, math tells you, just like I believe math tells you that there's aliens out there with the billions of stars and planets, eventually they're going to get it right. Now, there's a guy I have in mind. I think you would have heard maybe more about it, maybe not, if they go get him. But at some point, A&M is going to hire the right guy who can be the heart of the Mega Ranger. Because, again, what does A&M not have, right? And they have the resources, they have the facilities, they have the NIL, you have the tradition, you have the loyalty, you have the fan base, the home field atmosphere. It's just they need the right leader, and eventually they're going to get it right. Will they do it this time? We'll see.
So who do you think that right name is? You say you got an idea of one. Like, who do you think makes sense?
Pretty simple. Same reason why I'd take a guy in the transfer portal that I've watched tape on before over projecting a guy out of high school. It's Urban Meyer. Like, and you say that, people are like, oh, Urban Meyer, like it's Kim Jong-un or something. Yet I see him on Fox every Saturday on Big Noon Kickoff. Urban Meyer, I'm not saying he's the greatest person of all time, but I hate to tell everybody, there's a lot of people in this business that aren't exactly the greatest people of all time. There's a lot of coaches that have won who have not been the greatest people of all time. Everybody's not John Wooden. Sometimes you're Bob Knight. It works out like that. And when I look at a guy like Urban Meyer, you can sit here and project, hey, Lance Leipold's done a great job. Jeff Traylor's done a great job. But you haven't seen them in this environment going up against what they're going to have to go up against, including Texas and Oklahoma. I've seen Urban Meyer do that before. Not only have I seen him do it, I've seen him thrive. NIL takes care of recruiting. I've said this before, and people are like, oh, can he adapt to the times? Urban Meyer's greatest strength is his hiring ability. He knows who to hire to help him run the thing. He's got a great schematical mind, but he understands the CEO aspect of it. And the biggest thing, Nuno, and I think this would get him where you didn't have to break the bank. Nobody's done it at Texas A&M before. Steve Spurrier had done it at Florida before. Multiple guys had done it at Ohio State before. You can be the first one. You can be the golden goose. You can be the guy in the statue that started all of it, that turned Texas A&M into the monster. And some people won't like his personality. Well, guess what? When he's out there beating Alabama and Texas and Oklahoma, you're going to love him. Absolutely love him. I think Urban Meyer's a proven commodity. It's about time A&M got it right. And if you want to win, that's the guy you need to go get.
Are you not scared off by the fact that he hasn't coached in 5 years?
No, because here's my thing. You have guys, and different coaches have won with different styles, right? We've seen guys that call plays. We've seen guys that are CEOs. Urban Meyer, I think, is a great blend of that. It's not like he hasn't kept up with what's going on. You know, you look around the coaches talk, it's actually a lot smaller circle than what people think. And you know this, Nuno, and Billy and them know this. It's a lot smaller circle than what people think. And again, it comes down to hiring. I don't think Tim Cook at Apple could build an iPhone from scratch, but I know he knows who to hire. And at the end of the day, That's what wins when you're dealing with this amount of people, when you're dealing with a program that has that amount of personnel. That's the difference.
Jake, what's the bigger talking point? This amazing LSU offense or this ridiculously bad LSU defense?
Well, man, you talk about being gut-wrenching. I asked the other day, what's worse as a fan, having LSU's offense and LSU's defense, or having Penn State's defense and Penn State's offense? To me, I think the bigger talking point is the offense because of what Jaden Daniels is doing. I mean, this offense, you sit here and you start looking at the numbers, and again, Jamar Chase, incredible player. Justin Jefferson, incredible player. Joe Burrow, incredible player. What Jaden Daniels has been able to do with guys like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., who are great players, has been equally as impressive to me. It's sad, though, that this defense is that bad. My question, is how can LSU's defense be that bad? It's weird to watch. When I think of LSU, I do not think of offense. I think of those creatures they have running around on defense, knocking people's head off. The Glenn Dorseys, the Honey Badgers, the Marcus Spears. I can go down the list of guys that they put in the league every year. I mean, Harold Perkins this year has kind of put on the invisibility cloak and just disappeared in front of everybody. So while it's a bigger shock that LSU's that bad, while it's awkward to look at, to be honest with you, to watch LSU be bad on defense, what they're doing on offense is ridiculous, and they've done it against everybody. If Jaden Daniels doesn't get hurt against Alabama, and I know if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, that game may have ended like the Tennessee game did for Alabama last year. That's how good this cat is. That's how good this offense is. And I don't think Matt House is going to be there at the end of the year, but they better hope Mike Denbrock is, because boy, did they figure it out after the first week.
No doubt about that. Talking to Jake Crain here on Up to the Second College Football. Let's talk Michigan, Ohio State. The no Harbaugh, Ryan Day's got to get over, no excuses. I think I saw you talking to Joel Klatt about that. Just overall, what is this game going to come down to this weekend?
Well, look, at the end of the day, the game always comes down to how you play up front. But I think when you look at this matchup, the most glaring difference that I see is at the quarterback position and the experience, right? Throughout this year, I've heard people say, well, we don't know about Michigan. Michigan hadn't played anybody. You want to know how I know about Michigan? I've watched the same core of players for the last 2 years. It's basically the same cats. All they did was add a couple really good offensive linemen. They could have up to 7 offensive linemen taken in this draft. Now, when I look at Ohio State, defense is very talented, right? Kyle McCord, though, when a game that is going to be decided by 3 to 5 plays, like this game is going to be, how much do they trust Kyle McCord on the road to be able to open up this offense enough to let Maserati Marv, which we're going to hear 800 times this Saturday, or Igbuka or Stover and them really take advantage of what they can get against a Michigan defense that is experienced and very talented. So I think at the end of the day, as obvious as it may sound, I think it's going to come down to the quarterback position, because a lot of times teams lose games. They don't win them. Who's going to make that mistake? Who's going to make the critical error outside the pocket? Who's going to fumble a snap when they're not looking? That's what I think it comes down to. I think Michigan's defense comes up with a big touchdown to seal it late off a mistake by Kyle McCord, even though JJ has been a little iffy with his decision-making lately. I think a little bit of that's because Sharon Moore has held some stuff back, and JJ's itching to get the ball down the field. So I think it's a quarterback position. All
right, Jake, let's close out with Alabama and Auburn. I think the fact that Auburn lost this past weekend, people may be sleeping on them, but magic does happen typically at Jordan-Hare, or sometimes does happen. So how does this game break down for you?
Yeah, don't ever bury a pet or a person at Jordan-Hare, because it will come back to life, and not in a good way. I've seen crazy things happen. I'm from the 334. I'm from Lee County, and I've watched it my whole life. I think the New Mexico State win over Auburn was the worst thing that could have happened for Alabama, and one of the worst things that could happen for Auburn from an optics standpoint, right? Even though this New Mexico State team isn't Alabama State. You hear New Mexico State and you're like, oh, they're terrible, whatever. This Jerry Kill team's not bad. Now, Auburn should have beat them. It's unacceptable and inexcusable. But when I look at this game, it feels like Alabama has embraced, obviously, who Jalen Milroe is as a player. You look at the way the game plan's been tailored. You look at the way the play calling's been tailored to his strengths. I think Auburn's able to hang in it a little bit. My question isn't, can Auburn move the ball between the 20s? It's, can they score touchdowns in the red zone? I think they're going to have a good plan. But when you get to Jalen Milroe defensively, it's already hard enough to get to him. Can you get him on the ground? Because what's going to gut Auburn is the same thing that guts every defense on the planet. You're going out there and you're overmatched. And stopping Alabama's run, it can be done, Nuno. We've seen this happen before to this Alabama offensive line through different points of the year. They've kind of picked it up. But if you do get Jalen Monroe into predictable passing downs, you shut him down on first down at 2nd and 8. You stop him on 2nd and 8, it's 3rd and 7. You got him locked up in the back end on 3rd and 7, and Auburn's secondary is not bad. But you overrush the passer. He shakes a tackle in the backfield and runs for 8.5 and extends that drive where they go down and score. That's what'll gut you. Ron Roberts, Auburn's defensive coordinator, I think is going to mix it up. You need a whole buffet. It can't be a single course meal here. It can't be one thing. Can't live in a world of absolutes. I think it'll be closer than what people think. I'm actually leaning toward Auburn covering the plus 14.5, but I just feel like Alabama at the end of the day, science is science, gravity is gravity, talent is talent. Auburn's got 1 4-star that starts on offense. I like Alabama to win this game.
Jake, great stuff, man. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's do it again, all right?
It's always fun, man. You guys do a great job, and everybody have a happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the football watching.
Happy Thanksgiving, brother. Talk to you soon.
At Academy Sports and Outdoors, bikes for the whole family are just a click away. Buy online at academy.com with our free in-store assembly. Your next set of wheels, plus helmets, pads, and water bottles will be waiting for you at our in-store pickup counter. Get to the fun faster with our in-store pickup and free assembly at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
All right, let's get into Rivalry Week here with Billy and Caroline on Up to the Second.
All right, welcome into Up to the Second, presented by our friends over at Academy. I am Caroline Fenton. He is Billy Liucci. And Billy, it's a Thanksgiving week, but more importantly, it's Rivalry Week. But even more importantly than that, it is our week, my LSU Tigers and your Texas A&M Aggies, and probably one of the weirder, but most inexplicable rivalries in the SEC.
It really, and LSU, really even A&M, like A&M, it's not like they refuse to call it a rivalry. They just don't feel it as a rivalry. LSU refuses to acknowledge it as a rivalry. So it's not, but then go look at the history. First of all, the pre-SEC history has always been interesting. But just in the SEC, you have, LSU going 2-0 against Johnny Manziel. Mm-hmm. There was Les Miles saying goodbye before the A&M game back in, I believe it was 2015, maybe.
2015.
When they thought Jimbo was taking over, Les waving goodbye. And then at halftime, Joe Oliva, and they realized, oh, shoot, Jimbo's not taking it. And Les beats up on A&M and keeps his job. There was LSU going 6-0, and then A&M goes and hires the coach that LSU wanted, not once but twice.
Yep.
And in comes Jimbo Fisher and goes 3-2 against LSU. The first time Jimbo played him, you have 7 overtimes and the Gatorade bath of Ed O and was Kellen Mond's knee down. And the next year you have Joe Burrow. You also had, by the way, Ed O was getting replaced by Tom Herman at halftime of the game at Kyle Field. And they came in here without Leonard Fournette, and a guy named Darius Geis goes for $300. And Ed O, on the heels of that performance, gets awarded the interim. Gets awarded the head coaching job, gets the interim tag taken off.
Tom Herman goes elsewhere in Texas. That didn't work out too well.
Yeah, Herman goes elsewhere. And then LSU rips away A&M rips away John Chavis. Now, some people on the Bayou were saying, bye, good riddance.
Yeah, go ahead.
But A&M rips away Chavis. And then LSU rips away Woodward. And then Woodward tries to rip away Jimbo. And then A&M makes the disastrous fully guaranteed contract to Jimbo. And all they really had to do was a raise and an extension. This thing goes on the field. It goes off. You have 2019 Joe Burrow and LSU talking about the revenge they were going to take, and he comes out in the, BURREAUX jersey on senior night, and LSU just rolls past A&M.
A year removed from the 7 overtime game that changed the rules of college football.
Yeah, exactly. And then Edo and Max Johnson beat A&M a couple years ago, and then last year Brian Kelly and the Tigers walk in here and A&M beats the crap out of LSU out of nowhere at Kyle Field, a top 5 LSU team and an unranked at the time 4-7 A&M. So
a year after LSU, a lowly LSU team and a coach that's already been fired, inexplicably beats a very good Texas A&M team that beat Alabama earlier that season.
The whole thing, it has been a hell of a rivalry on the field, off the field, on the recruiting front, but no one will acknowledge it. And so it's going to be interesting Saturday. We can dive into the breakdown of it, but these teams will be playing at 11 a.m. LSU fans are pissed, Caroline. You might be one of them because Jaden Daniels is not getting that spotlight, and LSU fans think this is a Heisman. They know he has to go out and ball out and perform. It's his last shot before the Heisman. He won't be performing championship weekend. Penix and Nix both will. This is it for Jaden Daniels. So they want him to go out and have one of those 500-yard nights and all over the yard to Malik Neighbors and company. And, that they're pissed that's going to happen at 11 a.m.
There's one thing about me. I'm going to hate an 11 a.m. kickoff, no matter what. This might be LSU could be the worst team in the country. You could be the worst matchup of the day, and I would still throw a stink about playing at 11 a.m. But especially this week, you mentioned it. It's the Heisman conversation of Jaden Daniels is going into this race at an inherent disadvantage because you've got an 11-1, most likely after this week, Bo Nix. You've got an undefeated right now, Michael Penix Jr., you've got a 3-loss Jaden Daniels. And even though Jaden Daniels has better stats than either Bo Nix or Michael Penix through the air, on the ground, against more difficult competition, stronger strength of schedule, that for some reason, the important statistics and the important numbers and the actual production that Jaden Daniels has had this season, for some reason, just gets pushed to the side to LSU's record. So now Jaden Daniels kind of up against it, needs to have a big performance, and people need to be watching those big performances. Well, now it's going up against the biggest game of the week, the biggest game of the year in Michigan and Ohio State at 11 a.m. on Saturday. So it puts Jaden Daniels at even more of a disadvantage.
It does, and I'm kind of torn on this. If it's the most outstanding player of college football, but I think if you're voting right and properly, I do think you should consider who's the most valuable, who is the most impactful in college football that season, and all those things. Like if you took Jaden Daniels off LSU, that team might be 4-7 right now. I mean,
I thought 6-6,
with
7
that defense,
5
with
at
that
best.
At best, because with that defense, I know Nussmeier is a quality QB. But with their defense, without Jaden Daniels, they lose a lot of football. I mean, they would have lost to Arkansas.
You don't beat Arkansas.
They would have
I don't
lost
think that you beat Florida. I don't think that you beat, Missouri. You definitely don't
sure
beat
not Missouri. That might be
with
number
Jaden
one.
Daniels. So now you're sitting at 6-5.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. And
I don't think that you beat Texas A&M either.
Yeah. So I think at best you're sitting at like a 6-6. Maybe worse without you. So he is incredibly valuable. And I think he's the best player in college football this year. That's what my eyes tell me every Saturday. But I also do think if you're in the stratosphere of a person like that and your team is undefeated and in the playoff race and you're not a power program and you're a massive part of the reason why, like Penix, like Nix, I do think it's not just about stats. It's not just about watching and going, that's the most spectacular player this year. We're getting into almost like the Vince Young, Reggie Bush debate.
Yeah.
Well, but Bush was part of the best team too, but it was just such a collection. RG3 won it when Baylor, I think, went 9-3.
Lamar Jackson won it when Louisville went 9-3.
They both played A&M.
9-3 Florida team.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So to me, Daniels could go for 600 yards of total offense Saturday, and if LSU loses, he's out.
Yeah.
And I think at some point there's got to be a cutoff where you go rightfully so. I mean, he's a great player on a very average team because an 8-4 LSU team with the expectations they had coming in, that would be an average football team. I'd be saying, who did Jaden Daniels beat? You could even say that right now.
Missouri's
would say, doing good, yeah.
Probably the most quality win on LSU.
So you look at Jaden.
I did not expect that to be the case going into this.
They're
season.
good.
Missouri would be the best win on your schedule.
We've talked about them a lot. I think Eli Drinkwitz is the SEC Coach of the Year, but he needs to win Saturday and he needs to look really good. And like you said, because it's not on TV or because it's 11 a.m. and people are going to be watching Ohio State, Michigan, he's going to have to do something gaudy, and LSU knows that. And A&M knows that. And the Aggies have a great defense this year, but they've got one weakness, and it is big play receivers making big plays and quarterbacks heaving it up against A&M's corners and secondary. And if there's a bad matchup out there in the SEC, the two I would have thought were Ole Miss and LSU. And Ole Miss scored 38. Jackson Dart had the 370-something yard game. Miami attacked them deep down the field. That was Van Dyke's best game of the year. It was Milroe's best passing game of the year. It was a career day for Burton. LSU is going to go after that, and what does A&M do best? They get after the quarterback. Well, guess what Jaden Daniels does? He avoids pressure.
Escape pressure.
That's my key to the game. Can A&M get to Jaden Daniels and fluster him like they did last year to where he doesn't get out and create and make that pass rush get tentative, tired, or on their heels? If he does that, it's going to be air raid. It'll be a field day. If they can get to him and knock him around and stuff, we've seen him put up numbers in LSU scoring in the, low to mid 30s. That's the winnable range for A&M. They're not going to be able to play a game much into the 30s or 40s, especially with your third string QB going on the road.
And this is the best defense that LSU has faced all season. And I think the key for A&M's defense isn't just get after Jaden Daniels or fluster him to take the run away from him, because we saw that earlier this season in the first half against Arkansas. Arkansas's front really, for the most part, took Jaden Daniels' legs away from him, and it took that offense a while to adjust. I think this offense has gotten better week over week since playing Arkansas, but that's still a massive part of not just his game, but just this offense as a whole. I think another massive key is if not just getting to Jaden Daniels, but forcing turnovers.
Yeah.
I think that's really the only opportunity for this Texas A&M offense to go toe-to-toe with LSU's offense, is if they create more opportunities for themselves. Because if you're going in a shootout, whether you're rocking with Max Johnson or whether it's going to be Jalen Henderson.
Yeah. And I think it'll be Henderson.
You're not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with this offense. Not very many offenses in college football can.
No, and it's just not A&M's game. This defense. Look, this will be their test. And DJ Durkin's still here, and Elijah Robinson's still here, and that staff is intact. This is their biggest test of the year. I agree with you. They might be playing the best defense they've seen all year. Maybe it's Bama, maybe it's A&M, maybe it's Florida State. But look, at worst, you're right. This is as good a defense as they've played. It's certainly, I think it's the best front they've seen this year. Probably the best front seven. And this LSU offense is the best that A&M's faced. Better than Miami, obviously. Better than Bama, obviously. Better than Tennessee. Better than Ole Miss. And I like Ole Miss's offense. This is better. And I know Ole Miss won a shootout against LSU, but what I'll tell you is this. That's because LSU's defense is worse than Ole Miss's offense.
Yes.
And that's the big question.
Defense was that bad that day.
Is how bad is LSU's defense right now? I know sometimes people go, well, maybe it's improving, but let's be honest about who the Tigers have played since they faced Missouri. Who's on that schedule since then?
Alabama.
Lit them
Florida.
Up. Florida moved and scored, and they're not.
Florida I was able to run the score up. That was a close game going into the fourth quarter. That was a 3-point game going into half.
Yep.
That's a Florida team that might not even make a bowl game.
Yeah. So
It's not a very good Florida team. Auburn, but Auburn has one of the worst passing games in all of college football. And this was before LSU played Auburn, before Peyton Thorne really kind of found his footing.
Yep.
And you limit Army to 0 points, but also Army's one of the worst offenses in all of college football. And you saw Jalen Milroe run wild against this LSU defense. LSU's defense can't stop anyone. They can't. And maybe they get a couple of timely stops here and there. Maybe it comes down to just a couple of sacks or, a couple of pass breakups here and there. That's what it really was against Missouri. That was a back and forth shootout. And it came down to the fact that LSU got 2 very timely stops and got a pick 6 to end the game. And it's what the defense is going to give up. I would probably bet 400 to 500 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. It's just how much more can the LSU offense do? And can this LSU defense create turnovers to give LSU's offense more opportunities? Can this LSU defense at least come up with a couple of stops here and there?
To me,
the bar's on the floor.
Yeah, to me, the A&M, everything we've just said, I think Aggies need to win that turnover battle by like +2. To really to win that football game, they're going to have to win that turnover battle by +2. So even if you do give it up to LSU once or twice, then you better have a day on defense. Mm-hmm. My biggest concern with the Aggies is that game starts at 11. I would be worried about that game being momentum getting away from A&M by about 11:35. Like those first couple drives by each team, you can't let LSU go down the field and go up 7-0, get a 3 and out, go down and score again. Like that's when you can't go. Then even if you settle in and go toe to toe with them, it's too late. That's where A&M has to hang in and weather that early storm and set a tone that, hey, we can get Daniels and Neighbors and Thomas and company off the field. We can get stops here or there. And, by the way, we're going to move the ball on you guys just like everyone else has, even with our third-string QB. So those first couple possessions each team, get back to me after that. And if A&M's not down 10 or 14-0, I think this is a 4-quarter football game that could get pretty interesting. But don't assume that because it's 11 a.m. that the home team's going to come out asleep, because that's just not – it's not the way it works. It's certainly better than for the Aggies and them playing at night in Death Valley. But the reality is they went down to Oxford and were a holding penalty away from being down 21-0 in that one. So they're going to have to show up a little more ready to play. They're going to have to show up more ready. I understand the hangover against ACU, but Abilene Christian got after Jalen Henderson. They had 3 sacks very early in that football game, including a hit as he was throwing it that led to a pick 6. So still an issue for the Aggies.
Yeah, absolutely. And another factor in this game that I wanted your perspective on, looking back last year, for example, after Brian Harsin got fired, the way Cadillac Williams was able to fire that team up and just re-energize a really down-and-out Auburn team. I talked to DeMontre Moore on SiriusXM not too long ago, and he said, we love Coach E. We love Coach E. Every guy that Coach E has ever coached absolutely loves him. He was standing on the table for Elijah Robinson to get the full-time job. So what kind of element does that bring? Just the reinvigoration of this locker room with the coaching change, how they've kind of come together.
It's brought a lot.
Reaction, really.
It's brought a lot. They love him. It's not just the D linemen; it's the whole defense. It's all the players. Practices have been fun, lively, very competitive and spirited. Guys that had been sitting out with injury or practicing again, like all those things. But they look sloppy and sluggish at the start against Abilene Christian this week. They also did last year against UMass, and then they went out and beat a really good LSU team with Jaden Daniels leading the way. So we know not to put too much into that game, but they're also Jalen Henderson has done some really nice things. They're still playing with their third-string QB, whereas LSU's playing. Who's LSU's third-string quarterback, and what does their football team look like with him? I mean, that's where A&M's at right now. That's Jaden. I'm not saying that Wigman was Jaden Daniels, but Wigman, at the time he got hurt, people were saying, who's the best quarterback in the SEC? Is it Jaden or Wigman? I think most people would have said Jaden, and then the argument at the time was Jackson Dart or Wigman.
Right.
And so it would be like taking away Jaden, and then A&M lost Max. It would be like taking away Nuss. Where you at? Who's winning this game Saturday if it's Connor Wigman versus LSU's third stringer? And I'm not saying Connor even had to be even in Heisman contention, but imagine a healthy Wigman against – and that's exactly what –
But a veteran, experienced college football starting quarterback
and
against a kid. And Jalen's what, a redshirt freshman?
Yeah, and he's played – really has played two – he started 2 games. He's played 2 games of real college football, 1 SEC game ever. And he was really impressive. And it wouldn't shock me if he goes out there Saturday and has a really good game. It would not at all. He's got the mentality to do it. He's got the run-pass combo to do it. He's got the weapons to do it. But it's still asking a hell of a lot. Okay, if a third-string QB and a team that just fired its coach goes into Death Valley and he outduels a Heisman finalist, that'd be one of the biggest storybook performances, I think, in A&M history. Think about that. Like that's
How
what
could
we're
it not be?
That's what we're asking. And there's not an A chain to sit there and run for 250. So if A&M wins Saturday, Jalen Henderson is going to have a hell of a game. He doesn't have to match Daniels stat for stat or play for play, but he is going to have a hell of a game. He did in his only other SEC start, and old Mississippi State isn't any good, but I don't know how much worse their defense is than LSU's. So
It's pretty damn bad.
yeah,
It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
Inexplicably bad.
Yeah, I didn't understand how, of all the things I would have expected from Mississippi State, they got players on that. They had athletes on that side of the ball, and there's been a lot of inexplicable in the league this year. One thing that's not inexplicable, or 2 things that we could have probably predicted, were Alabama being really good under Nick Saban and Auburn being really bad in year 1 under Hugh Freeze. And maybe they're even a little better. People were starting to feel better about them. And then that was humiliating on Saturday. Humiliating.
After Auburn blew Arkansas out, I thought, uh-oh. Here comes Hugh Freeze in Auburn, because I remembered. I went back to a conversation that we had. This was before the Texas A&M Auburn game.
Yep.
I said, I think you're getting Hugh Freeze in Auburn at the perfect time because they're still figuring things out. And I think they're going to get to a point where they do figure things out and they might be dangerous. Look at the Iron Bowl. Circle that game.
Yep.
I thought after the Arkansas game, oh my God, it's coming true.
Yeah.
Hugh Freeze is doing it. He's figuring it out with Peyton Thorne. And then they go out and they don't even just lose to New Mexico State off of a fluky, weird play, weird turnover, walk-off field goal. No, they got dominated all game long in all 3 phases at home against New Mexico State.
Yep.
And credit to New Mexico State, because that's not a bad team.
No.
But that is a horrendous look for Hugh Freeze and that team. And I know we can bring up Nick Saban and ULM. I know we can bring up Ed Orgeron and Troy in 2017. Yeah. Neither of those teams got beat as badly as Auburn did against New Mexico State on Saturday night.
Yeah, and A&M loses to App State, LSU loses to Troy.
That's another one.
But those programs, and look, for A&M's sake, it was Jimbo in year 5, so it's not even apples to apples there. That was a loss that got the wheels. Yeah, that was a loss that got the wheels moving. But at least App State and Troy, these teams are traditionally winning a lot of games in that Sun Belt. They're year after year. They're programs. They're successful.
Yes.
One coach leaves, a new one comes in. They keep going. Like they are.
And
programs.
App State is known for that.
Yes,
being giant killers. Michigan, Texas A&M last year. JMU this year beating JMU last week.
Yep, that's true. I forget they beat So App State and Troy are different than New Mexico State. Mm-hmm. And again, like you said, they're doing a good job there. Credit them. But to go into Jordan Hare and beat them like that, what a gut punch setback that is in year one for Freeze and at the worst possible time. So not a lot to talk about the Iron Bowl.
But I still think the Iron Bowl could be a game.
Do you?
I do, because it's the Iron Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think that Alabama is going to win this game and is going to win this game handedly. I wouldn't be surprised to see it being maybe kind of reminiscent of the Tennessee-Alabama game.
Yeah.
Where Tennessee was just dominating for an entire half, and then all of a sudden Alabama makes some adjustments, comes back in the second half, and kind of imposes their will. But I think Auburn's going to be able to make some plays because it's the Iron Bowl, and this is a weird game, and this is a weird rivalry.
They played with Georgia.
Played close with Georgia.
LSU,
Hangover.
not so much. So, look, the real game to me that's interesting me in the SEC this weekend outside of A&M LSU, it's not even an SEC game. It's Florida State. And I don't know how interested I was going to be in it until Jordan Travis, that devastating injury that everybody hated to see. And
awful.
They're sitting there on just a collision course with the playoffs. Now they got to go into the swamp, beat Florida, and then they also have to go beat a strong Louisville team for the ACC title. Devastating, like a crushing injury. But can Florida State go in, and I know they do some real damage running the football and with that defense, can they go into the swamp and pull off a victory against a very average Florida team, but one that more than once this year has kind of come up and looked good and had a strong game.
And keep in mind, Florida has a backup quarterback out there too.
Yeah, and without Mertz, I still like Florida State in that one, but damn, it gets interesting now, doesn't it?
I think that this is such an interesting game because both teams are playing for something on different scales.
Yep.
Granted, Florida State's playing for an opportunity to get to the college football playoff. Florida is playing for an opportunity to go to a bowl game. Mm-hmm. So very different vibes, but two very important things to those programs respectively. And now you're both doing it with a backup quarterback. I think kind of all bets are off. Whatever you know about these teams or whatever you thought you knew about these teams, now take that with a grain of salt because Jordan Travis, who has been the heart and soul of that football team all season long, you're not going to have him. Mm-hmm. So is Florida State going to be playing for him and rallying around him and looking at the college football playoff rankings that came out earlier this week and saying, you counted us out and you're doubting us because you dropped us out of the top 4. I don't think there's any better motivation than that. But also on the other side for Florida, pick any team that's playing in a very long-seeded rivalry game like this, whether it's Auburn, Alabama, whether it's Clemson, South Carolina, Florida State. No team wants to do anything more than win a championship, win a conference title, and beat their rival. So Florida's playing not just for a bowl game, but for the opportunity to derail Florida State's season and to spoil their chances to go to the college football playoff. Again, can't think of much better motivation than that, and especially getting to do it on your home turf.
I'm getting some LSU A&M vibes from last season.
You think so?
I mean, a lot of what you said, I'm looking at, going to see who this was calling. Never seen it. We're not going to answer it. Sounds like a weird number. Don't know why they'd be calling. They're trying to find out coaching info, which we'll talk about in a second. I'm just saying a lot of what you said, Caroline, it fits like the LSU coming into A&M last year. They didn't have national title hopes. They did have playoff hopes. They were sitting there just outside the playoff field. Florida State sitting just inside of it. It's one of the more interesting games of the weekend for obvious reasons. The whole country is going to be dialing into that one. Probably number 2 this weekend in college football in terms of interest. I think Oregon State, because Oregon State was able to beat the Ducks last year. That's going to be another one. I don't think anyone's going to be worried about Texas and Texas Tech. The Red Raiders aren't good this year. But anyway,
and of course, Michigan, Ohio State. That's
the number one, right?
College football playoff qualifier game.
Okay, so let's talk. I got one quick question, and then I want to talk. If there is some chaos, what's the most chaotic? Where do you sit on this talk of like Florida State should be viewed as different now because they will not be going into a potential playoff with Jordan Travis? And should that factor into their selection? I want to hear your take, and I'll let you know mine, or I'll just say I agree.
I think it's total bullcrap.
Agree.
Go back to 2014. Ohio State won a national championship with their third string quarterback.
Cardell, yeah,
So
right.
to make an assumption that this team is going to take a step back because they don't have their starting quarterback, I don't think is very fair.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if Florida State goes out in the swamp, they lay an egg, they lose that game, well, then
Sure.
you fall out of playoff contention because you lost that football game, not because you lost your starting quarterback necessarily. But looking at how Florida State dropped out of the top 4 and how Washington's now in that number 4 spot, I would like to think that the committee rewarded Washington for a win over a really good Oregon State team in Corvallis in those conditions. It was raining all night long. I think that switch between 4 and 5, of course, bumping Florida State down, Washington up, had more to do with Washington and less to do with Florida State. But I think it is total and complete bullcrap for anyone that believes that Florida State should not deserve a playoff bid because their starting quarterback is out for the season.
Totally agree. No, and I think Florida State will be in if they win out. I think, you've got the Ohio State-Michigan thing, and who's to say, UW would have to beat Washington State, then Oregon, and then you have the potential Bama, Georgia thing if Bama was to win. So, yeah, let's start talking real quick before we go, Caroline. Some chaos with that playoff as things could shake out in the next over the next 2 Saturdays.
I think the conference to watch, of course, is the Big Ten because you're going to have one slot in the top 4 carved out for either Michigan or Ohio State because the winner of that game plays Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. So go ahead and put the winner of this game on Saturday into the playoff. Yes. The conference to watch is the Pac-12. Because let's say Oregon does lose to Oregon State and Arizona beats Arizona State. Arizona goes to the Pac-12 title game and will play Washington in the Pac-12 title game. What if Arizona beats Washington in the Pac-12 championship game? Okay. Do you put a 1-loss Washington into the playoff or does nobody get in?
Probably
does that open the door for Texas?
Well, probably no one. When you're talking chaos now, you're talking that happening and Texas losing to Oklahoma or Oklahoma State or whoever it can. Is it OU, Oak State, K-State? Are those the other
K-State.
3? It would be Texas losing to one of them and that happening in the Pac-12 and Florida State losing a game. Then what?
And then Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, and then both Bama and Georgia get it.
Okay, let's talk that whole scenario there. You're going Michigan, Ohio State winner. But then how much in play is the loser? So you go Michigan, Ohio State winner. You've got Pac-12, Oregon's out with 2 losses.
Yep.
You'd have Washington with 1. And no conference
Washington would get in as the non-conference champion.
Well, I'm saying leaving them out. You'd have Washington with 1. Well, I'm just saying let's talk about the contenders for 2, 3, and 4. You'd have so Bama would be in that scenario
as the SEC champion, and
with
I think
1
you
loss.
would have to put Georgia in too.
So you'd have 2. So you'd probably have a 1-loss Georgia in, and everybody would be really mad. Then for that last spot, you'd have, let's talk this out. You'd have a 1-loss Florida State that didn't win their conference, or that did if they lose to Florida and beat Louisville. You'd have let's say a 1-loss Florida State without Jordan Travis that did win their conference, a 1-loss Washington that did not win their conference, 2-loss Texas would be out. And you'd have actually that would probably be, and then the 1-loss Big Ten runner-up, or not runner-up, but Michigan or Ohio State. You'd have them versus a 1-loss Florida that did win their Florida State that did win their conference but doesn't have their quarterback, and you'd have a 1-loss Washington team that didn't win its conference. I think you'd probably. Wow!
If Louisville beats Kentucky and then wins the ACC championship game, there's a path.
In our scenario, they would be
Yeah.
one of the teams considered. That's
A lot would
wild.
have to go wrong that's out of Louisville's control. It's not a very clear path, but there's a path.
That's pretty wild.
Texas loses, Washington loses, Oregon loses. If they win the ACC championship game,
The scenario we just painted, that fourth spot would go to either the Michigan Ohio State loser. It would go to a one-loss UW that didn't win its conference, a one-loss Louisville that did win its conference. And those would be the contenders for that spot. I think what would happen, I think it would be the Michigan Ohio State loser. And everyone would be really mad because you'd have Bama, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, 4 blue bloods, 2 of which people would argue shouldn't be in there.
the more things
your chaos
seem to change,
theory
the
would
more
cover.
they stay the same. Yeah. And I think it's so funny going back to the beginning of the season when Alabama lost to Texas, didn't look very good doing it, barely beat South Florida. And I think Alabama could have 4 conference losses
I
of
thought
this
they were a
year that has
3-loss
seemed
team.
to be so incredibly chaotic. Same kind of contenders,
Yep.
same conference champion contenders, same college football playoff contenders. So as much chaos as there is, as many chaos scenarios exist, I wouldn't be surprised to see Georgia, Ohio State or Michigan,
Yeah.
maybe even Alabama, maybe even a Texas, a Florida, a Washington, Florida State or a Washington. But something to look at.
Let me ask you this then.
Yeah.
How do you think it goes? Who do you think of the 4 playoff teams standing in 2 weeks, week and a half?
I think it's going to be both Georgia and Alabama.
So
Because
you
I
think
think
Bama's
that
beating
Alabama
Georgia?
beats Georgia in the conference championship game.
Okay.
Kind of a 2021 year reincarnated.
Okay.
I think that Michigan beats Ohio State.
Okay.
So I think that Michigan gets in, and I think Washington takes care of business. I think it's going to be those 4: Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, Washington.
I think it's going to be
In no particular order.
I think it's going to be Georgia. I think they're going to beat Alabama. I think it's going to be Georgia. I think it's going to be Michigan.
Hmm.
And I think it's going to be UW. And I think the Jordan Travis injury is going to clear a path for Texas. And as much as we hate saying that around here, they don't play anybody, Caroline. And we talk about all these teams and how they're going to be tested. They don't play anyone. They haven't played anyone in a month plus. They haven't played anyone. You look at Oklahoma right now. They haven't played anyone since at least Oklahoma. And they would argue with you, and they can do that argument thing, and there's nothing you can say about it till next year, till they're in the SEC. But they beat Bama. They're one big, they're one game against a team that I honestly think even has a pulse this year.
Yeah.
I think they're going to get in. And I think the most interesting, likely debatable scenario, in my opinion, is going to be when there's 2 of them. There is the Bama beats Georgia, and it is
Texas
the one-loss
beat Bama.
Georgia versus a one-loss Texas when Texas won a conference championship. And this is where I hate this. Texas won a conference championship in a far inferior conference.
Mm-hmm.
But these people, sometimes they get in their head, well, they won a conference. I don't give a shit. Sorry. I don't give a damn. What conference? If it's a bad conference, it's lesser. You don't say one's a conference champ, one's not. The difference is Texas would have beaten Bama at Bama. Georgia would have lost to Bama at neutral. Then you have to start saying, well, who are you to say that Bama's way better now than they were then versus, So I think in that scenario, Texas would get in. And oddly enough, I think Georgia might be the odd man out.
Could be.
Do
But
I?
I think late in the season, with wins over a now top 10 Missouri team,
Mm-hmm.
a top 15 Ole Miss team, and a Tennessee team that just simply cannot seem to drop out of the top
know.
25, no matter how many times they get blown out.
Yeah.
That's 3 top 25, not just wins, but 2 out of the 3 of those games were blowouts.
Yeah, they're hanging.
But that's also my SEC homerism. So take all of that with a grain of salt. But with the Texas and Alabama scenario, I think the college football playoff doesn't want to get into a position where they undervalue or dilute the importance of regular season games. Because I understand the argument of why would you put Alabama in over a Texas team that beat Alabama in their own home stadium. But if Alabama beat Georgia, that would be the best win in all of college football.
Yeah. Here's my other one. I said I think you're making me rethink that one about Texas and Georgia there in that scenario. Now, here's another one for you, and this is the one I think Texas doesn't get in on, and maybe you're going to make me change my mind again, but Oregon beats Washington. Texas wins out. They're both one-loss teams. They're both conference champs. Bama beats Georgia. Bama loses to Georgia. I'm sorry. So Texas's win over Bama is a 2-loss Bama team. Oregon beats an undefeated ranked number 4 Washington team. Oregon looks much better down the stretch than Texas does. Who goes? I think in that instance, Oregon goes.
It'll be Oregon because I don't think you can put both Oregon and Washington, because you got two one-loss teams.
Yeah.
I would put Oregon in, and then, of course, Georgia would be in.
Georgia,
and then either Michigan or Ohio State would be in.
Florida State and Oregon. The question then is, if Florida State loses, that we're going crazy here. But this is how nuts it is with just 2 weeks left. Florida State loses, and all those things happen. You have one loss Washington. Mm-hmm. You have one loss Texas. You have one loss Georgia. You might have one loss Louisville. And you have, so that would be, and you'd have a one loss Michigan, Ohio State.
And a one-loss Bama in that scenario.
And a one-loss Bama. But Bama would definitely get it over Georgia, having won the SEC.
They win the SEC championship.
So you'd really be deciding for those 4. Things would get very interesting very quickly.
If there's one thing that I've learned about the college football playoff is at this time of the season, there are a million different scenarios of what if this happens and then this happens and then this happens and everything goes right for this team, everything goes wrong for this team. Correct me if you think it differently, but looking back in the last 10, 11 years of the college football playoff, doesn't it always seem to work itself out?
It does.
Doesn't there always seem to be just, all right, there's a clear 4, and then I think 2020 is probably the odd man out, but that was also a weird year. And of course, Texas A&M felt the effects of being the odd man out. But I would say every single year I look at the top 4 and I think, yeah, like that's right.
I think
I think there's 3 good teams, not even 4.
That's the
this
thing.
year there's like 10.
That's the thing. There's usually like 3, and then the 4th people go, yeah, we could argue 4 and 5, but does it really matter? And this year it will, because 4 versus 1, whoever 4 is, will have a real shot. 1 is not going to be unstoppable, even if it's Georgia. So Georgia or Bama, like 1 is not going to be unbeatable. So I do think it's going to matter this year, and I do think this is a year where it's not going to be so clear-cut, and that's going to be fun. We'll see. Should be fun Saturday in Death Valley, even if it's at 11 a.m. Caroline, are you going, or are you watching in Nashville?
I am not going. I'm going to be with my family this weekend. Okay. I was in Baton Rouge for the LSU Florida game. Yep. And I think that maybe my mind, body, soul needs a little bit of a break from Baton Rouge after that weekend.
Mine too, but I think I'm going to just dip down there morning of and come back. That's kind of the plan.
You should.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll report back to you.
Get some good food. Yeah, report back. My boots on the ground reporter, Billy Liucci. Expect to wake up Saturday morning to some smack talk texts from me. But it's going to be a good game. It's going to be a beautiful day in Baton Rouge.
We'll have plenty to talk about, and we'll really dive into this A&M coaching search, which, heck, it could be wrapped up by the time we talk next week if we go back to our normal Tuesday. Might be by then, might not be, but we could end up with a lot to talk about. And we will talk about it on Tuesday. Where?
Right here on Up to the Second, presented by Academy. For Billy Liucci, I am Caroline Fenton. Happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the games this weekend.
Gobble, gobble.
Thank you, everyone, for watching Up to the Second College Football presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. We'll see you next year, but hopefully you keep watching on TexAgs.com.